The village of Leone was small, tucked between rolling hills and dense forests where the sun filtered through the leaves in golden streams, and the river wound like a silver ribbon through the center. Life moved at a gentle pace, but beneath the calm exterior simmered old grudges and quiet rivalries. Every market day villagers exchanged more than goods. They carried whispers, rumors, and the invisible weight of grudges passed down through generations. Children played in the dirt streets, laughing and chasing each other, oblivious to the tension that lingered in the air, while elders leaned on worn wooden poles, their eyes sharp and knowing, reading the currents of envy and fear that no one spoke aloud. In the heart of the village lived Ayana, a girl of 12 years with eyes like polished amber and a courage that belied her age. She moved with a quiet confidence, carrying herself as though she belonged not only to the village but to something larger, something unseen. Ayana had learned early to watch and listen, to notice the undercurrents of glances, the subtle tilts of heads, the whispered words carried like smoke through the streets. Despite her youth, she understood the fragility of respect and the ease with which admiration could turn to resentment. Ayana's mother, Kessia, was known far and wide for her wisdom and her knowledge of herbs. She healed wounds, soothed fevers, and offered counsel to villagers who sought guidance. Her reputation as a woman of knowledge and intuition made her both revered and feared. People came to her with ailments of the body and the spirit, trusting her remedies and her words, yet some families watched her with suspicion, whispering that her skills were unnatural, that her insight was too sharp, her influence too great. Mothers warned daughters not to provoke her, while men muttered that she wielded a power they did not understand, a power that could threaten their own standing in the village. Ayana often accompanied her mother to gather herbs in the forest or visit those who needed healing. She admired Kessia's calm strength, the way she spoke softly but carried a weight that made others listen, the way her hands could touch pain and make it vanish. Kessia taught Ayana not only the names of plants and the ways to mix them but also the importance of discernment and empathy, of observing not only what people said but what they did not say. Power is not in the strength of your hand, Kessia often told her, but in the patience of your heart and the clarity of your mind. The villagers' respect for Kessia was sincere, yet it was mixed with unease. Some envied her knowledge, others feared it. Old rivalries found fertile ground in these sentiments, as families who had once held influence felt their standing wane before Kessia's quiet authority. The village council whispered about her decisions, her judgments, her ability to unite people with a word, a gesture, a knowing glance. And in quiet corners, parents warned their children, "Be wary of Kessia's daughter, for courage often comes wrapped in challenge, and the child of a wise woman may inherit both wisdom and defiance." Among all the whispers and glances, a proverb endured, carried in hushed tones from one generation to the next: "Fire may consume the hut, but truth rises with the smoke." The villagers repeated it when misfortune struck or when envy flared, a reminder that some things, though hidden or threatened, could not be destroyed. Ayana did not yet fully understand its weight, but she felt it in her chest, a quiet pulse that matched the rhythm of her mother's heartbeat, a promise that even if darkness came, the light of truth could not be silenced. In the evenings, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the air filled with the scent of cooking fires and river water, Ayana would sit with Kessia outside their hut, watching the smoke curl from the hearth. She would listen to her mother's soft humming and the gentle murmur of the village, and in those moments she felt a connection to the land, to the people, and to the quiet power that lived within them. Ayana knew, even if the villagers did not yet see it, that change was coming, that her life and her mother's wisdom were entwined with something larger than envy, fear, or rivalry, a fire that might be tested, but whose smoke would carry secrets that could not die. The envy simmered quietly at first, like embers hidden beneath the ashes of a long-forgotten fire. Maru, the head of a neighboring family, was a man whose pride matched the size of his ambitions. His ancestors had once held a place of honor in the village council, guiding decisions and influencing the flow of trade and alliances. Yet as Kessia's reputation grew, Maru felt the weight of diminishing authority pressing against him, and with it, the sharp sting of jealousy. Every compliment that Kessia received, every grateful nod from a villager seeking healing, became a spark that threatened to ignite his smoldering resentment. Maru's envy was not hidden. He watched Kessia from across the village square, his eyes narrowing whenever she spoke to a child with a comforting hand, or when a farmer bowed in thanks after a successful remedy. He seethed quietly at the way villagers sought her counsel before consulting him or his family, a family that had once been seen as the keepers of wisdom and tradition. Maru began to whisper to those who would listen, his voice carrying just enough conviction to sow doubt. Kessia is clever, yes, he said to a neighbor while plucking the last red peppers from his garden, but cleverness can hide greed. Do not be fooled by her smile. There are things she keeps from us, things she does for herself. Slowly the murmur spread. First, a woman in the market mentioned seeing Kessia linger too long over her herbs, as if selecting secret ingredients. Then a man whispered that Kessia had been seen talking to spirits in the forest at night, that her knowledge of roots and leaves was not natural, but guided by forces unknown. By the end of the week, the village buzzed with unease. Parents warned their children to be careful when approaching Kessia, strangers hesitated before asking for her remedies, and even some friends cast sideways glances, unsure whether to trust what they had long held as truth. Ayana noticed it immediately. She could sense the tension in the air, thick as smoke, pressing down upon every street and alley. People's voices grew lower when she approached, their eyes flicking to her mother and then quickly away. Children who once ran to greet her now lingered behind, uncertain, whispering to each other about what they had heard. Even the elders, who had once treated Ayana with warmth and fondness, now exchanged quiet looks, shaking their heads as if weighing the weight of unseen threats. Ayana felt the shift deep within the rhythm of the village, a subtle but undeniable change that sent shivers along her spine. She began to observe more closely, noting how Maru's family moved together like a carefully coordinated shadow, always present at Kessia's gatherings, always asking questions in a way that seemed innocent but carried hidden intent. Ayana saw Maru's eyes follow her mother as she healed a sick child, saw the whispers that spread from his lips to the ears of villagers who trusted him, and felt the chill of fear creeping through the hearts of those who had once admired her mother without question. Kessia, as wise as she was, noticed the shifting tides but did not act hastily. She taught Ayana that power often draws envy, and that those who spread rumors are as much prisoners of their own fear as their victims are of the lies. Do not fight with words born of malice, Kessia said one evening as they gathered herbs by the riverbank. Let the truth speak in its own time. Shadows can stretch, but they cannot extinguish what is real. Ayana absorbed the lesson, but her heart ached at the sight of villagers she had known since infancy turning wary eyes toward her mother. Even the air itself seemed heavier, the sun's warmth dulled by invisible tension. She could feel the weight of Maru's jealousy like a tangible force, pressing down on the village and on Kessia, threatening to bend the world around them toward suspicion and fear. Despite the unease, Ayana remained courageous, walking through the village with her head held high, her eyes alert, sensing every whisper and every cautious step. She began speaking gently to those who feared, offering small reassurances, and carrying her mother's calm energy with her as she moved among the homes and fields. Yet the shadows continued to lengthen. Maru and his family worked tirelessly, spreading rumors and weaving fear into every corner of the village. They claimed Kessia used her knowledge for selfish gain, manipulating herbs to control others, whispering that her remedies carried hidden intentions. Even the strongest among the villagers began to hesitate, wondering if the woman they had trusted for so long truly harbored secrets. Ayana, though young, could feel the coming storm. She understood that the envy and lies were only the beginning, that the fire of human jealousy could burn hotter than any flame. And she knew, deep in her heart, that both she and her mother would need to be ready to face it, for the truth would rise, just as the village proverb said, with the smoke. The night had fallen heavy and silent, the sky a blanket of black velvet without a single star to witness what was about to unfold. The village of Lumera, usually alive with the soft sounds of evening, children's laughter, the low murmur of elders and the whisper of the river through the reeds, seemed to hold its breath. Ayana felt the stillness pressing against her skin, a chill creeping along her spine as she glanced at the hut where she and her mother lived. She had noticed the tension in the village for weeks, the suspicious glances, the whispers that seemed to follow her mother wherever she went, but nothing could have prepared her for the horror that was about to strike. Maru and his followers moved like shadows through the night, silent and deliberate. Their anger had been simmering for months, fueled by envy, pride, and fear of Kessia's growing influence. They carried bundles of kindling and oil, their faces hidden by cloth masks, their hearts hardened by the conviction that they were delivering justice. Maru's hand trembled slightly as he lit the first torch, the flame licking hungrily at the dry wood. "This ends tonight," he muttered, and his companions nodded, echoing his determination. Inside the hut, Ayana and Kessia were unaware of the danger until the first flicker of fire caught Kessia's sharp eyes. Smoke curled along the roof, thin and almost playful at first, but quickly growing into thick, suffocating clouds. Kessia's heart pounded, but she remained calm, her mind racing as she grabbed Ayana's hand. "Quickly, my child," she whispered, her voice steady despite the rising panic. "We must leave, but remember what I taught you. Take nothing but what matters and keep your heart clear. The rest can be rebuilt, but you cannot." Ayana clutched her mother's hand tightly, her small fingers digging into Kessia's palm as they ran. She glanced back once, catching a glimpse of the flames consuming the walls, the thatched roof collapsing with a roar that seemed to echo through the hills. The fire painted their faces in orange and gold, a horrifying dance that turned familiar objects into shadows and ash. Every herb Kessia had carefully tended, every small jar of remedies, every woven mat and carved stool, all vanished in smoke and flame. Ayana felt her chest tighten, grief and fear clashing with the courage her mother had instilled in her. Outside, the villagers watched. Some froze in shock, unsure of what they should do. Others whispered prayers but did not move to help, constrained by fear of Maru's wrath or perhaps by the inertia of doubt. They had watched jealousy grow and now witnessed its destructive force firsthand, yet many remained silent. The fire roared, and the smell of burning wood and herbs filled the air, a thick, choking reminder of the hatred that had been festering among them. Ayana saw neighbors hiding behind their huts, peering cautiously at the destruction, and she understood even at her young age the devastating power of inaction. Kessia guided Ayana through the dense undergrowth beyond the village, the forest swallowing them in its cool, protective shadows. The flames of their home glowed behind them, a beacon of loss and betrayal. "Do you feel the smoke, Ayana?" Kessia asked softly as they ran. "Even as it destroys, it carries something with it. Secrets, warnings, memories. Never forget, my child, that what is lost in fire is never truly gone. Listen to the smoke and it will teach you what you need to know." Ayana nodded, her eyes wide and reflecting the flickering light behind them. She could hear the roar of the fire mingling with the crackle of collapsing beams, the frantic cries of frightened animals fleeing the blaze, and the murmurs of villagers too afraid to intervene. Each sound etched itself into her memory, a painful reminder of human cruelty and the fragility of safety. But beneath the terror she also felt a strange pulse, a rhythm carried by the smoke, a promise that the fire, though destructive, would not silence the truth. As they paused at the edge of the forest, the wind shifted, carrying the thick, curling smoke toward the hills. Ayana breathed in the acrid air, tasting loss and something deeper, almost alive in the swirling gray. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "Remember, Ayana," Kessia said, "the smoke is not just fire. It carries lessons, warnings, and secrets. One day you will understand all it whispers." Behind them, the hut succumbed completely to the fire. The thatch collapsed inward, the walls crumbled, and the flames danced higher, consuming all in a brilliant, horrifying display. Yet even as the last embers fell, Ayana felt a strange steadiness in her chest. She turned to her mother, eyes shining with determination. "I will learn," she whispered, "and I will not let it end here." Through the night, the smoke rose, thick and curling toward the heavens. It carried with it the essence of everything lost: the home, the herbs, the safety of childhood, but also the secrets that could not be destroyed. Ayana knew, as she walked beside Kessia into the darkness of the forest, that their story had only begun. The fire had burned the hut, but the smoke carried a truth that would endure, guiding them through the trials that lay ahead. As the fire consumed the last remnants of Kessia's hut, the smoke billowed into the sky, thick and curling like restless spirits. Ayana watched it with wide eyes, feeling a strange pull in her chest, as if the rising tendrils were reaching for her, calling her to pay attention. The flames behind them cast a hellish orange glow across the forest, painting the trees in shifting shadows, but it was the smoke that captivated her, twisting and turning in ways that felt deliberate, almost alive. It moved like a river in the wind, curling into spirals, then stretching into long, thin threads that seemed to whisper secrets she could almost hear. Her mother, Kessia, walked beside her, steady and calm, though her face was lined with grief. "The smoke," she said softly, "is more than fire and air, Ayana. It carries what the world cannot always speak aloud. Watch it closely. It may teach you what my words cannot yet convey." Ayana's heart pounded. She had always known her mother's teachings held depth and wisdom, but now, confronted with this surreal phenomenon, she realized that Kessia's lessons were far larger than the walls of their hut or even the borders of the village. The smoke was a messenger, alive and patient, waiting for her to understand its language. As they paused at the edge of the clearing, Ayana noticed that the smoke was not uniform. Some wisps seemed to form shapes, letters she recognized but had never learned to write, images of herbs and symbols her mother had traced in the sand while teaching her the names of plants. She blinked, rubbed her eyes and looked again. The smoke shifted and formed the outlines of faces. Her mother's, yes, but also figures she had only heard of in stories, wise women of the past whose voices had once guided the village in secret. The smoke seemed to bend around her vision, carrying knowledge meant not to scare, but to instruct, to prepare her for what was coming. Ayana felt a shiver run through her. The messages were subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone who had not been trained to see them, yet clear to her, as though the smoke recognized her as its pupil. Letters and symbols glowed faintly within the gray and black tendrils, forming instructions and warnings. Some were reminders of what her mother had told her in whispers. Trust the river's song. Look to the trees when you seek guidance. Fear not the darkness, for it holds the path you must follow. Others revealed truths her mother had never spoken aloud, lessons of patience, courage, and discernment that had been hidden in preparation for a day like this, a day when fire had destroyed the tangible but could not touch the eternal. Ayana's fingers traced patterns in the air, as if touching the smoke might make it solid. Each swirl of gray and white seemed to respond to her, moving aside to reveal new shapes, new letters, new secrets. She realized, with a mixture of awe and fear, that the smoke was alive in a way she had never imagined. Not conscious like a person but aware in its own way, aware of the destruction, aware of her presence, aware of what needed to be preserved. It carried her mother's voice, her own growing courage, and the memories of the hut that now only existed in the flames and ashes. Kessia watched quietly, her eyes soft but alert. "Do you see it, Ayana?" she asked. "Do you understand that this is more than smoke? These are the lessons you need. The world may have lost the house, but it cannot take the knowledge, the wisdom, the guidance. It rises with the smoke to find you, to protect you." Ayana nodded, tears blurring her vision, though these were not tears of sorrow alone. They were a mixture of grief, wonder, and resolve. She felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders, but it was tempered by the knowledge that she was not alone. The smoke was with her, her mother's voice and legacy guiding every step. As they followed the edge of the forest, Ayana began to interpret the messages more clearly. A swirl of smoke shaped like a river reminded her to seek guidance from flowing water. A wisp curling into the form of a tree suggested shelter and safety, and other patterns hinted at herbs and remedies she had yet to learn. Each revelation strengthened her, turning fear into determination, sorrow into focus. The smoke had not come to terrify her. It had come to teach her, to arm her with knowledge that would become her shield and her weapon in the days ahead. 4 hours they watched and walked, the smoke drifting ahead of them, guiding, warning, and revealing. Ayana's heart, once heavy with grief, began to swell with purpose. She realized that the fire, though destructive, had only unveiled another layer of truth. The hut was gone, but the smoke had carried the wisdom of generations, the whispered secrets her mother had guarded, and now it entrusted them to her. In that moment, Ayana understood. The fire had been a test, the smoke its teacher, and she, courageous, attentive, and willing, was ready to learn what the world had always tried to hide. Ayana ran through the forest with her mother, her small feet pounding against the soft earth, leaves and twigs snapping beneath her weight. The air was thick with the scent of smoke, mingling with the earthy perfume of the forest floor. Behind them, the flames of their home devoured the last traces of familiarity, casting long shadows that danced against the trunks of the ancient trees. Ayana's heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear and urgency, but she felt Kessia's steady hand guiding her, her presence a calm anchor in the chaos of the night. The forest welcomed them, its dense canopy shielding them from prying eyes and the lingering gaze of the villagers who had stood powerless while the fire consumed everything. They ran until the sounds of the village, the crackling of flames, the startled shouts of those who had watched in silence, the distant footsteps of Maru's followers, were muted by distance. Only then did Kessia allow them to pause, leaning against a wide, gnarled tree trunk, her chest heaving but her mind alert. Ayana looked around at the forest, the tall trees forming a protective barrier, their branches swaying gently in the night breeze. She felt a strange comfort here, as if the trees themselves had been waiting for them, ancient sentinels ready to hide and guard them from harm. "Kessia," Ayana whispered, still catching her breath, "what do we do now? Where will we go?" Kessia's eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness, met her daughter's. "We survive, Ayana, and we learn. The forest is alive with wisdom, as is the smoke that carries our past. Do you remember what I told you about reading the signs?" She gestured to the curling smoke that still drifted faintly on the wind from the distant fire, rising like spectral fingers that reached toward them even from afar. Ayana nodded, remembering the shapes and letters she had glimpsed, the faint forms that had seemed to move with intention in the smoke above their burning hut. Yes, mother, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But how can we understand it all? Kessia smiled softly, a mixture of pride and determination on her face. It is not simply about seeing, Ayana. It is about listening and feeling. The smoke speaks to those who know how to pay attention. Each curl, each twist, carries a story, warnings, guidance, and truths long hidden. Tonight, it will teach you, and you will begin to understand the village in ways you never could from within its walls. They settled among the roots of a massive baobab tree, its trunk wide enough to offer shelter and its branches a canopy that seemed to guard them from the world beyond. Kessia pulled a bundle of herbs from her satchel, remnants she had managed to carry, and began arranging them carefully, as if performing a ritual rather than a mere survival tactic. Ayana watched, her eyes flicking between the herbs and the faint wisps of smoke that drifted across the clearing. Kessia began to hum softly, a tune that resonated with the movements of the smoke, and Ayana felt the air thicken with quiet energy, as though the forest itself leaned closer to listen. You see, Ayana, Kessia said, the smoke does not lie. It will never speak falsely, but it will only reveal what is ready to be understood. It holds more than warnings about danger. It carries knowledge about the hearts of those in the village, the secrets that have been kept, and the truths people fear to speak aloud. If you learn to read it, you will see what others cannot, the patterns of envy, the lies that fester, and the wisdom that has been hidden for generations. Ayana leaned forward, her fingers tracing the shapes of the smoke as it drifted lazily over the clearing. She felt a strange sensation, as if the smoke were tangible, brushing against her skin and leaving impressions in her mind. Images of the village appeared in the curling tendrils, the market where Maru whispered to his allies, the hut of an old healer whose knowledge had been hidden for decades, and the paths that led to places of power and memory. Each shape seemed alive, pulsing with meaning, and Ayana realized that the smoke was teaching her not only to see but to perceive. 4 hours they stayed in the forest, the night deepening around them. Kessia continued to hum, whispering instructions and interpretations, guiding Ayana as she learned to follow the smoke's subtle cues. They discovered that the smoke held information about alliances and betrayals, about hidden wells of courage and secret caches of food and medicine. It was a living map of the village, a history etched in the air that only the observant could read. By the time the first hints of dawn began to pale the horizon, Ayana's understanding had deepened. She could sense not only the immediate dangers but the underlying truths that had long been obscured by fear and envy. The fire had destroyed their home, but it had also opened her eyes to a knowledge that would shape her and guide her in the days to come. The smoke was no longer merely a byproduct of destruction. It was a teacher, a guardian, and a messenger of the truths that could not die. Ayana looked at her mother, gratitude and determination shining in her eyes. I understand, mother. I will learn from it and I will remember. Kessia placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder, her touch grounding yet empowering. Then let us begin, Ayana. The forest will protect us and the smoke will guide us. Together we will uncover the secrets that were meant to survive, and in time, the village will learn that knowledge and truth cannot be consumed by fire alone. In that hidden sanctuary among ancient trees, with the lessons of the smoke enveloping them, Ayana and Kessia found not only refuge but purpose, ready to face the path that lay ahead. Back in the village, the first light of dawn revealed the aftermath of the fire, and Maru allowed himself a small, triumphant smile. From his vantage point near the market square, he watched as villagers emerged from their homes, blinking against the smoke that still lingered in the air. The charred remains of Kessia's hut stood as a stark reminder of his success, proof that the woman whose wisdom had once threatened his standing had been silenced, at least so he believed. For the moment, the village seemed quiet, subdued by awe and fear, and Maru felt the familiar thrill of victory that came with watching his rivals fall. Yet the early triumph was deceptive. Within days, subtle and unsettling changes began to ripple through Lamera. The fields, once vibrant with rows of maize and millet, showed signs of stress. Leaves curled, roots withered beneath the soil, and fruits shrank to hollow shells, bitter and inedible. Farmers who had relied on these crops for sustenance and trade grew anxious, whispering in hushed tones about mysterious blights that had no explanation. Maru's brow furrowed, but he dismissed it as coincidence, confident that his enemies had no remaining influence to cause harm. Water from the village well, which had always been clear and sweet, began to sour. Vessels filled with the fresh liquid now emitted a strange odor, and those who drank it found their stomachs turning uneasy. Mothers rushed to find alternative sources, children crying as thirst became an urgent problem, but even the streams and small pools surrounding the village carried a subtle bitterness, a reminder that something was amiss. Maru tried to reassure himself that these occurrences were natural, that perhaps drought and disease had merely found their way to the village, but a quiet, gnawing fear began to take root in his mind. The animals, too, seemed to sense the shift in the village's balance. Chickens hid in the underbrush, goats refused to graze, and even the dogs, loyal and steadfast, became skittish, ears pricked and tails tucked, refusing to obey the calls of their owners. Those who attempted to hunt found the forest eerily silent, the usual rustle of wildlife replaced by a heavy stillness that pressed against the ears and chest. Maru dismissed these signs initially, insisting that fear and superstition were clouding the villagers' judgment, but the emptiness of the fields, the foulness of the water, and the absence of the usual forest sounds could not be ignored. Whispers began to spread among the villagers, soft and trembling, but increasingly persistent. They spoke of the smoke that had risen from Kessia's hut during the fire, smoke that had seemed to twist and dance with intent as if alive. Some claimed that they had glimpsed shapes in the curling tendrils even from a distance, that the smoke carried messages, warnings, perhaps even curses. Mothers hushed their children, elders nodded grimly, and traders avoided the central square, murmuring about the danger of speaking aloud. The proverb that had long accompanied Kessia's wisdom resurfaced in whispers: "Fire may consume the hut, but truth rises with the smoke." Now the villagers began to sense that the smoke had not only carried wisdom but also a lingering power, one that could not be destroyed or ignored. Maru, initially dismissive, began to feel the unease creep into his bones. Shadows seemed longer, colder, and more deliberate, lingering where they should not. The wind carried whispers, too subtle to decipher fully but enough to unsettle him. Even the villagers who had once supported him in silence now regarded him with wary eyes, unsure whether the triumph they had celebrated was genuine or a harbinger of consequences they could not yet perceive. Murmurs of curses and hidden truths, all linked to Kessia and the smoke that had risen from her destroyed hut, spread like an invisible contagion, eroding the confidence that Maru had once felt so firmly in his grasp. Fear took root, quiet at first, then growing in strength with each passing day. Villagers avoided areas closest to the charred ruins, claiming that shadows lingered longer there than elsewhere. Some said that at night, faint shapes appeared in the drifting smoke, shapes that seemed to watch, to wait, to judge. Even those who had previously dismissed Kessia's abilities now began to understand the depth of her knowledge, the wisdom she had carried in secret, and the consequences of underestimating her. Maru's brief triumph turned to dread. The crops failed, the water soured, animals disappeared, and the villagers whispered of a curse that would not die. The smoke, which had risen in anger, grief, and warning, carried messages beyond their understanding. Kessia had fled into the forest, yet her presence lingered, alive in the rising tendrils, a reminder that power rooted in truth could not be destroyed by fire or envy. The village, once confident in its triumph, now trembled under the unseen weight of what had been awakened, and Maru realized with a cold certainty that destroying a home did not extinguish the spirit within. It only let it rise, stronger, carried on smoke that could not die. Ayana sat beneath the protective canopy of the forest, her small hands brushing the edges of the curling smoke that rose faintly from the distant remains of their burned hut. The air carried a strange resonance, a vibration that seemed to hum with meaning. At first she thought it was merely the remnants of the fire, ash and scent mingling with the cool night breeze. But soon, patterns began to emerge in the smoke, twisting and coiling with intent. Shapes she had seen before now became clearer, letters forming with a precision that defied natural randomness, symbols and images that spoke to her in a language older than the village itself. Ayana realized that the smoke carried stories, secrets that had long been hidden, waiting for someone attentive enough to notice. Her mother's teachings came back to her in fragments. The way to listen, the way to see beyond the obvious, the way to read the invisible currents that flowed through people, places, and even fire. The smoke revealed betrayals committed decades ago, alliances formed in secret, and pacts that had been broken or forgotten. Ayana's eyes widened as she traced a twisting wisp that depicted a long-lost treasure buried beneath the roots of the oldest baobab tree in the village square. The image shimmered and shifted, merging with the depiction of her mother, Kessia, standing over it, a protective guardian ensuring that the knowledge would survive. Ayana felt a deep reverence for the layers of protection her mother had woven around their family and the village. Kessia had not only healed and guided her people but had also safeguarded wisdom that others would have misused. The smoke revealed how her mother had navigated treachery and jealousy over the years, quietly protecting sacred knowledge, herbs with mystical properties, and secrets that ensured the balance of the village's life and spirit. Each tendril of smoke that danced before Ayana seemed to tell a story that her eyes could read even when her ears could not hear. One wisp shaped like a serpent coiled around a chest, clearly representing the envy and malice of Maru's family. Another wisp formed the outline of Kessia, her hands lifting away the chest from danger. Ayana understood instinctively that the fire had not erased the protective measures her mother had taken. It had, in fact, activated them in a new form. The smoke, born of destruction, had become a living messenger, carrying the essence of Kessia's foresight and wisdom. The flames that Maru had unleashed to destroy them had inadvertently ensured that the secrets could no longer be hidden in plain sight, that they now existed in a medium no one could touch or corrupt. Ayana felt a mixture of sorrow and empowerment. She grieved the loss of their physical home, the familiar walls, and the comforting smell of herbs that had always been a part of her childhood. But she also felt a surge of understanding and responsibility. She saw how the village had been shaped by the same envy and fear that had led to the destruction of their hut, and she understood that knowledge and truth must be protected not out of pride, not out of desire for revenge, but to maintain balance and harmony. The smoke made it clear that her family's legacy was more than survival, it was stewardship. The lessons continued, unfolding in a rhythm that felt like breathing. Ayana traced shapes of village elders and past leaders, seeing the ways their decisions had influenced the flow of life. She saw the threads of betrayal woven by families seeking power, the hidden treasures of wisdom and medicine that had been buried to keep them safe, and the moments where her mother's interventions had steered the village away from ruin. With each revelation, Ayana felt the weight of duty settle firmly on her shoulders. She understood that the path forward was not about punishing those who had wronged them but about restoring what had been endangered, ensuring that the village could thrive in knowledge and justice once more. Her gaze hardened with determination. "I see it now, mother," she whispered to the empty forest as though speaking to Kessia who had guided her in silence. "I will protect these truths. I will learn from them. I will act to restore what was broken." The smoke curled in acknowledgement, the shapes shifting to form symbols of guidance, pointing her toward the paths she must take. It seemed almost alive, a sentient presence that knew she had grasped the lessons and was ready to guide her further. Ayana spent hours interpreting the smoke, absorbing its teachings, and feeling the profound connection between destruction and revelation. The fire had sought to obliterate, but in truth, it had strengthened the very secrets meant to endure. She realized that her mother's wisdom, combined with the mystical messages carried by the smoke, had given her not only knowledge but also purpose. Ayana's mission was clear: to act with discernment, to honor the legacy of protection her mother had upheld, and to restore balance to a village teetering on the edge of fear and chaos. By the time the first hints of dawn broke through the forest canopy, Ayana's understanding had crystallized. She knew that her family's journey was far from over, that the smoke carried more to teach her, and that her role in the village's future was vital. With renewed determination, she rose, ready to face whatever trials awaited, guided by the living, whispering smoke that refused to die, just as the truths it carried would not. Ayana stepped cautiously into the village at dawn, the first light casting long shadows across the smoldering remains of what had once been her family's home. The air was heavy, not only with the faint scent of smoke but with the tension that had been building for days. Villagers moved quietly, heads lowered, their eyes avoiding the remnants of the hut and the girl who now walked among them with a calm determination that belied her youth. With each step, the curling tendrils of smoke that had once risen from the fire seemed to gather around her, thickening and swirling as if in anticipation, amplifying her presence and lending weight to her purpose. Maru, who had been sitting near the market square with a few of his supporters, noticed her approach and stiffened. The smug confidence that had marked his demeanor since the night of the fire faltered. He rose to his feet, attempting to appear authoritative, though a flicker of doubt crossed his face. "What is this, girl?" he demanded, his voice edged with both anger and unease. "Have you come to plead or to cower?" Ayana did not answer immediately. She allowed the smoke to flow around her, letting its ethereal patterns reveal the truths she had learned in the forest. Images flickered within the haze, Maru's whispered conversations plotting the destruction of her family, the secret agreements with villagers who had feigned neutrality, and the hidden thefts and betrayals that had long been covered by fear. Each image crystallized in the air, visible only to those who chose to see, yet palpable enough to chill the hearts of the guilty. "I am here," Ayana began, her voice steady and clear, carrying through the hushed square, "not to plead but to reveal what has been hidden. You burned my mother's hut thinking it would destroy us. You thought fear and fire would silence truth. But the smoke carries more than ash, it carries memory, knowledge, and consequence. As her words echoed, the smoke around her responded, swirling with intensity, forming shapes and symbols that mirrored her declarations. Wisps of gray and white spiraled into forms depicting the villagers' complicity and Maru's leadership in the arson. The villagers murmured among themselves, fear rippling through their ranks as the visual evidence of deceit became undeniable. Faces turned pale and eyes darted nervously to one another. Some tried to speak, to deny what they saw, but the smoke responded to Ayana's resolve, intensifying its movement and revealing deeper truths. Misappropriated goods, lies told in the shadows, and old betrayals that had been ignored out of convenience or fear. It was as if the air itself was judging them, a witness to their wrongdoings that could not be silenced. Maru's composure broke as the smoke wrapped around him, forming images of his own greed and the pain he had inflicted on the village. His supporters shifted uneasily, seeing not only their own guilt but the long-term consequences of their actions. Crops failing, wells turning foul, animals disappearing, all of it traced back to the choices they had made, choices made in the blind pursuit of envy and power. The smoke moved with purpose, highlighting each transgression in stark clarity. Ayana's gaze swept over the crowd, steady and unwavering. "Do you see now?" she asked, her voice both gentle and firm. These were not random misfortunes. They were warnings carried by the smoke, the truth rising from the ashes of what you tried to destroy. The fire could consume our hut, but it could not erase the wisdom, the knowledge, or the lessons that must be learned. Every secret you buried, every wrong you committed has been revealed. And now it is up to you to face the consequences. Some villagers dropped to their knees, shame and guilt overwhelming them, tears mingling with the smoke as if acknowledging its authority. Others attempted to speak excuses, but their words were drowned by the movement of the haze, which seemed to hum with Kessia's voice, guiding Ayana and reinforcing the truths she shared. The smoke carried more than memories, it carried understanding, showing that justice need not be cruel to be inevitable. Maru's face twisted in anger and fear, yet he could not look away from the images forming in the smoke. His own hand clutching torches, the burning hut reflected in ghostly swirls, the harm he had caused laid bare. Ayana stepped closer, her voice unwavering. "It is not too late to mend what you have broken. Confess and perhaps the village can heal. Hide nothing, for the smoke knows all and the smoke does not lie." With each word, the smoke responded, spiraling higher and forming radiant patterns that illuminated hidden corners of the village square. Even the walls of the neighboring huts seemed to glow faintly in its light, casting shadows that revealed misdeeds once invisible. The villagers understood now that the fire had not ended with destruction. It had awakened a truth that demanded recognition. Ayana stood tall, her eyes reflecting the flickering brilliance of the smoke, carrying with her the weight of knowledge, justice, and hope. The air around her pulsed with power, whispering of protection and consequence. In that moment, Maru and the villagers saw clearly that the attempt to destroy Kessia and her family had failed. For truth, once awakened, could not be extinguished, and the smoke that carried it would endure, teaching lessons that would echo for generations to come. Ayana walked through the village with a quiet confidence that had not existed before. The people, once filled with fear and suspicion, now watched her with awe and cautious respect. The smoke that had once carried secrets now lingered gently in the air, a subtle, guiding presence that seemed to follow her steps, reminding everyone that the truth could not be hidden and that wisdom could endure even the harshest trials. Ayana had learned to read it, to understand its messages, and to use its guidance to restore balance and healing to her home. She began by tending to the land. Fields that had withered under neglect and fear were now nourished with knowledge gleaned from the smoke. Ayana guided the villagers to plant in harmony with the rhythms of the soil, using methods her mother had whispered through the smoke during their time in the forest. Streams and wells were purified, some with simple herbal remedies, others with careful observation and understanding of the hidden forces at play. Animals returned, drawn by the renewed vitality of the land and the careful stewardship Ayana exercised. Crops flourished once more, colors bright and leaves vibrant, a testament to the resilience that comes from wisdom and care rather than mere force. As the village healed, Ayana also turned her attention to the people themselves. She called gatherings beneath the shade of the ancient trees, inviting the villagers to speak openly about their fears, their mistakes, and the injustices that had been committed. At first, many hesitated, wary of the consequences, but Ayana's calm and patient demeanor encouraged honesty. She used the smoke as a teacher, showing them the consequences of past actions, not to shame, but to illuminate lessons that could prevent further harm. Families reconciled, grudges were softened, and those who had hidden behind fear and envy began to understand the value of transparency and cooperation. Ayana's presence became a living symbol of guidance. Children followed her steps, eager to learn the ways of observing, listening, and understanding the unseen patterns of the world. Elders who had once doubted Kesia's wisdom now respected her daughter's insight and sought her advice on matters of governance and communal decisions. Even those who had actively opposed her family found themselves compelled to honor the lessons of the smoke and the truth that it revealed. Slowly, the village transformed from a place burdened by suspicion and jealousy into a community grounded in knowledge, trust, and mutual care. She also began teaching the art of interpreting the smoke to those ready to learn. Small groups of villagers, attentive and patient, learned to see the hidden messages in the curling tendrils, discovering insights into the land, the cycles of nature, and the intricate web of human relationships. The smoke became not a symbol of fear or punishment but a living guide, a repository of wisdom that Ayana and her students could read to navigate challenges, heal divisions, and foresee dangers. Through these lessons, Ayana ensured that her mother's legacy endured, not as an abstract memory, but as a practical living knowledge that strengthened the entire community. The village square, once silent in the aftermath of the fire, now bustled with renewed activity. Markets reopened, the laughter of children returned, and the once dim air seemed lighter, infused with the energy of restored hope. Villagers who had cowered in fear now worked together, their interactions marked by cooperation and understanding rather than suspicion. Ayana moved among them, offering guidance when needed, but more often observing, allowing the lessons of the smoke and the land to teach them in their own time. Her reputation spread beyond the village. Travelers spoke of the girl who had survived fire, who had learned from the smoke, and who now guided her people with wisdom and compassion. People came seeking her counsel, eager to learn the balance of truth, knowledge, and action. Ayana received them all, careful to instill the principle that power must be tempered with understanding, that knowledge without purpose could be dangerous, and that true leadership came from service rather than dominance. Through her work, Ayana solidified her role as a guardian and healer. She did not rule by fear, nor did she seek vengeance against those who had wronged her. Instead, she focused on restoration, on uncovering hidden truths and nurturing the land and people to thrive again. The village, once a place overshadowed by envy and destruction, now pulsed with vitality and harmony, a living testament to the enduring strength of wisdom and truth. As the seasons turned, the villagers came to understand that knowledge and truth were stronger than fire and fear, more enduring than greed and malice. And throughout it all, Ayana remained vigilant, guided by the smoke that had once carried secrets, now a constant companion in her mission to protect, heal, and teach. The village thrived, not only in survival but in understanding, a community reborn under the watchful and compassionate care of Ayana, whose courage had transformed tragedy into lasting wisdom. Generations passed, and the story of Kesia and Ayana became woven into the very fabric of the village. In the evenings, when the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long across the fields, children gathered around the fire, wide-eyed and attentive, eager to hear tales of courage, wisdom, and resilience. Elders spoke with reverence, recounting how a mother and daughter had survived betrayal and destruction, how fire had consumed a home yet could not destroy the truths it held, and how smoke had carried those secrets, guiding Ayana to protect the village and restore balance. The children listened intently as the elders described the night when Maru's jealousy had ignited flames that threatened to erase all that Kesia had built. They imagined Ayana and her mother fleeing into the forest, their hearts heavy but their spirits unbroken, guided by whispers of smoke that revealed hidden paths, secret knowledge, and the lessons that would shape the village for generations. The smoke was described not merely as a physical presence but as a living entity, a messenger of truth that could not be silenced, carrying the wisdom of the past into the hearts of those willing to see and listen. Young ones were taught that the fire had not been an end but a beginning. It had revealed the strength of character, the resilience of spirit, and the enduring power of knowledge. Kesia's wisdom, once hidden in the ordinary rhythms of daily life, had now become immortal, preserved in stories, rituals, and in the living memory of the people. Ayana's courage, patience, and understanding had transformed her into a guardian figure, someone whose actions were guided not by vengeance but by the principle that truth, once known, must be nurtured and protected. Elders emphasized that the smoke, rising invisibly or seen curling from distant chimneys, was a symbol of this enduring truth. They told children to watch carefully, to listen for messages in subtle things, and to understand that even when hatred flared and destruction loomed, knowledge and morality could not be extinguished. The smoke, like Ayana's guidance, carried lessons about vigilance, justice, and the importance of acting with integrity. It reminded the villagers that no act of malice, no matter how powerful, could erase what was rightfully preserved in the hearts and minds of those who honored wisdom. The proverb endured across generations, repeated with solemnity and hope. They may burn the hut, but the secrets it holds will rise with the smoke. It became a lesson in resilience, a guiding principle for young and old alike. Parents taught their children to respect knowledge and to seek truth, to understand that even in adversity, there is guidance waiting to be found. The story of Iana and Kessia was recounted at every festival, in every lesson, and whenever a fire crackled in the hearth, the curling smoke reminded the villagers of what had been lost and what had been preserved. As the years went by, the village thrived, mindful of the lessons carried by the smoke. Fields remained fertile, waters stayed clear, and communities prospered under the guidance of those who remembered the tales. When disputes arose, the elders invoked the story of Iana, reminding all that justice and understanding must guide their actions, and that truth, once recognized, holds power far greater than fear or destruction. Children grew up learning that courage and wisdom could outlast envy and fire, and that the legacies of those who acted with integrity could shape the world long after they were gone. Stories evolved as stories do, adapting with the times, but the essence remained. Kessia's knowledge, Iana's courage, and the smoke that carried their legacy could never be destroyed. It became a living lesson, a ritualized part of the village's identity, where every rising wisp of smoke from a fire or hearth reminded people of the resilience of truth. It taught them to be mindful, to protect what is good, and to respect the invisible forces that preserve justice and wisdom. Even when the village faced hardships, when storms tore across the land or rivalries resurfaced, the story was recalled, offering guidance and perspective. The children grew into adults who valued understanding over fear, cooperation over selfishness, and who carried forward the principles that Iana had established. The invisible threads of truth, like the smoke from the burned hut, wove through every aspect of village life, ensuring that knowledge endured and that lessons from the past shaped the present and the future. Thus, the legend of smoke and secrets became more than a story, it became a compass, a moral framework for generations. Iana and Kessia's courage, wisdom, and resilience lived on not only in memory but in practice, guiding the hearts and minds of all who called the village home. And whenever a fire's smoke rose into the sky, the villagers would remember and whisper the enduring proverb, "They may burn the hut, but the secrets it holds will rise with the smoke."